Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to all our guests here today. We are speaking from London. My name is Christina Hipsley, and I'm the General Manager of the Portuguese Chamber of Commerce here in the UK. And today I would like to welcome you to our webinar, the update on changes to Portugal's non-habitual residence tax regime, which are as a result of the recent approval of Portugal's 2024 state budget. Now, we're delighted to see so many of you arriving for the webinar. Thank you so much. We're giving just a few more moments for all of you to log in, and I can see the numbers are flooding in, so I will now continue with my short introduction. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm Christina Hipsley from the Portuguese Chamber of Commerce here in the UK. And as many of you already know, the Chamber organises the Moving to Portugal shows and seminars in the UK. Many of our speakers here today have been with us in the shows and seminars, and I'm sure many of you have attended over the last couple of years. Our next show will be in London on the 14th of March, 2024, not that long ago, or not that long to go, only 12 weeks. So if you would like to come along, meet some of our panelists here today and a range of other speakers and exhibitors who can help you with every aspect of your move to Portugal, please have a look at our website, www.movingtoportugal.org.uk. Now, just so you know, this webinar will be around 45 minutes long, and we're going to take questions at the end, because I know you've got lots of great questions. We've had several fantastic questions in already. If you would like to put your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, we will be taking the questions at the end, and I will put them to the relevant speaker. We expect this webinar to be no longer than 45 minutes, because I know you all have a great deal to do. And all the presentations that we give you today will be sent to you by email shortly after the webinar finishes. Now, our intention today is to give you an insightful webinar where we discuss the key aspects of the recent changes to the NHR regime, and also give you some of the advice and guidelines that you need to follow over the next few weeks and months. So hopefully we're going to raise some key issues that you've been thinking about, and you can get some advice and feedback from the specialists we've got for you today. So a word about our three speakers today. Tamara, our next slide, please. So, excuse me. Our first speaker today will be Nuno Santos, who's the tax partner of CMS law firm, big law firm in Lisbon, also has big offices here in London as part of their worldwide network. And Nuno will be explaining the current non-habitual resident tax regime, which is in force in Portugal. And people who want to live in Portugal full time do find this, what's called the NHR regime, very attractive as an option. No doubt many of you watching today are already applying for it or want to know more about it. Nuno will explain the changes that have happened recently. Our next slide and our next presenter after Nuno will be our friend and colleague Mark Penny from Suncap Visa. He will explain some of the options about how you can still apply for the NHR before the proposed new deadline and changes come into effect. And he'll also be talking about the other program you may have heard quite a lot about, Portugal's Golden Visa program, which you don't need to live in Portugal permanently to apply for, but it does give you residency in Portugal and a path to European citizenship. And then our third and final speaker, next slide please, Tamara, will be our friend Maria Alvarez from Vida Advisors. And Maria will be explaining some more details about how you can get European citizenship via the Portugal's Golden Visa program, which is slightly different, very different from the NHR program, but she'll be talking specifically about how the Golden Visa works with funds, how you invest via investment funds, specifically with hospitality funds. So I've given you a bit of background. We'll just have a look at the next slide, which summarizes the topics that we'll be talking about. And the next slide, as we've called it, navigating the maze, which I think is fairly relevant. So CMS will cover these topics. Suncat will follow up on CMS's advice. And then Vida and Maria will talk you through a couple of options you might want to consider. So, ladies and gentlemen, on that note, I think I will now introduce our first speaker. We will just do a quick handover of the slides. So we will now introduce Nuno Santos from CMS Lawyers. And hopefully Nuno's already got control of his slides.
Not yet.
Not yet. We'll give it a couple more minutes. Our technology is running smoothly. And our friend Nuno will be talking to us in some detail. If we go back to the first slide.
Yeah, now I can control it. Sorry.
I can control. Okay, fantastic.
Thank you.
Nuno, thank you so much. Welcome to our webinar today. And I know that your particular speciality is tax. You are the tax partner at CMS in Lisbon. So I think there's no one better to update our visitors today, because everybody interested in Portugal knows that the Portuguese government very recently announced some very important changes to the NHR tax regime. And there have been, these changes have been confirmed by the recent budget approval. So do talk us through some of the details that our audience would like to know.
Thank you very much, Christina. Thank you very much to the Portuguese Chamber of Commerce as well. So in fact, as you were saying, being a Portuguese tax lawyer in these days have been very, very busy days, because as you were mentioning, ever since we had back in the beginning of October, the state budget law proposal for 2024, that was the first time when we heard that the NHR regime could potentially be cancelled. Then we had the Prime Minister resigning, so there was a bit of hope that we could keep the NHR alive for 2024. But then we had the news that the state budget law would still be approved, and it has effectively been approved by the Parliament last week. So in fact, and looking at the Portuguese NHR tax regime, which is what brought us all here today, in fact, we have, so the first thing that I wanted to mention is that it was not cancelled yet. In fact, so what changed? As I was mentioning, the 2024 state budget law foresees the cancellation of the NHR tax regime for anyone that would, in principle, be joining or would try to join after the 31st of December 2023. But the truth is that with the last version and the final version of the state budget law, there is what we call a grandfathering regime that it may potentially allow people that still want to join the NHR tax regime next year, so until the end of 2024, they may potentially still join. But in order to be able to do so, they need to have complied or to comply with specific steps until the end of the present year. So when we hear in the news that the NHR regime is no longer going to be cancelled this year, we need to be careful because it's not exactly, or may not be exactly true. So starting first on what is the NHR tax regime. So the NHR tax regime has first of all been implemented back in 2009, and it has been a very, alongside the Golden Visa, has been one instrument that has been attracting lots of high net worth individuals to Portugal, and it has been, and it has been used as an instrument that has boosted the Portuguese economy. So when I look at I'm trying to, sorry, Tamara, can I, the previous slide. Thank you. So as I was saying, so it's a regime that has been in place since 2009. And what are the main benefits that the NHR tax regime brings? So they are mostly on foreign source income. So people that become Portuguese tax resident with this NHR status do benefit from full exemption on dividends coming from outside of Portugal, on interest coming from outside of Portugal, on real estate income, which includes both rental income or capital gains on the sale of non-Portuguese located properties. In respect of pension income, we have a flat rate of 10%, again, foreign source income pension. In respect of salary, we have two possibilities. If the salary was effectively taxed in the source country, then it is fully exempt from tax in Portugal. If it has not been fully taxed, if it has not been effectively taxed at source, then what we have is the possibility of applying a flat rate of 20%, which compares to the progressive Portuguese tax rates that can go up to 48%. So this 20% rate implies that you have either an employment income or a self-employment income, but that is required to derive from a high added value activity. In respect of Portuguese source income, the only advantage that the NHR regime brings is that, again, on employment or self-employment income deriving from high added value activities, there is this 20% flat rate. Everything else from Portuguese source will be liable to tax, or an NHR status holder will have the exact same tax framework than a regular Portuguese tax resident would. Am I missing the button to?
Yes, I think Tamara will
please, Tamara, sorry.
take you to the next slide. Yeah.
Please, sorry. So other things that they are important to know about the NHR regime. So even though all the exemptions that I was mentioning, they have as an exception, they cannot derive from offshore listed jurisdictions, and bear in mind that the Portuguese offshore list is quite big. So if they derive from blacklisted jurisdictions or offshore listed jurisdictions, they will not benefit from the NHR regime unless there is a double tax treaty with Portugal in place. And there are several cases where, on one hand, Portugal treats the country as a blacklisted jurisdiction, but on the other hand, Portugal has a double tax treaty with that country, and therefore the double tax treaty relationship prevails over the blacklisted nature of the country. That, to give you an example, that happens, for example, with the UAE, with Hong Kong, and other jurisdictions. The salary income exemption, as I was saying, requires an effective taxation at source. So the income needs to have been effectively taxed in the country from where it is deriving, whereas dividends, interest, and real estate income, they do not require an effective taxation at source. They only require the double tax treaty to allow the source country to tax the income. One of the biggest weaknesses of the NHR regime are typically, and again, depending on where the income is coming from, capital gains from the sale of financial products, shares, and other products are typically liable to taxation in Portugal at a 28% rate. So they typically do not benefit from an exemption. And the final comment would be that you need to make sure that when you become Portuguese tax resident, they don't need to be simultaneous, but in principle, one can only be a tax resident of a single country, because that country is the one where you should declare your worldwide income. And therefore, when you become Portuguese tax resident, in principle, you should step down as tax resident from the country from where you left. Next slide, please. So requirements of the NHR tax regime. To not have been a Portuguese tax resident, at least for the past 5 years. So this is not only a regime that applies to foreigners. If we have anyone who is a Portuguese citizen and has been living abroad for more than 5 years, that person will also be eligible by becoming again Portuguese tax resident. And to become Portuguese tax resident requires you to comply with one out of two alternative conditions. Either to spend more than 183 days in Portugal, or to have in Portugal a title over a Portuguese address that you may call your primary residence. So as we can imagine, we have several clients that do not spend more than 183 days in Portugal, but they have, because they travel a lot, for example, but they have in Portugal their main place of residence, their base, and therefore Portugal is entitled to call them as Portuguese tax residents. And obviously, as I was saying, even if you are NHR, if you benefit from the NHR status, obviously you only benefit from it if you are getting the income that are effectively exempt or that have reduced rates, and they derive either from Portuguese source or from foreign source. Next slide, please, Tamara. So what are the steps for the NHR tax regime application? And we are very close to the year end, so it has been a big rush for people to try and get access to the regime before it is cancelled. So the first step is to establish the main residence in Portugal, either by acquiring or leasing Portuguese property, and to register as Portuguese tax resident, because this is something that sometimes confuses our clients. And the NHR is not a different thing. So the NHR is a status linked to the Portuguese tax residency. So an NHR is as Portuguese tax resident as I am, for example, but because he was not a Portuguese tax resident for at least the past 5 years, that person gets access to a special status that regular Portuguese tax residents don't, and obviously for a period of 10 years, okay? So you need to register as Portuguese tax resident before the end of this year, or by the end of December 2024, but in this case only provided that you complied with one of these conditions. And this is what I was mentioning about the fact that in principle the regime would be cancelled by the end of this year, but what the final version of the state budget law brought us is to say that if you complied with specific conditions throughout 2023 and until the end of the year, you are still entitled to only apply for the NHR until the end of next year and not until the end of this year. And what are the conditions that, and I've eliminated the ones that have already elapsed, because there are some conditions that need to have been taken until the 10th of October. Why the 10th of October? Because the 10th of October was the date where in which the state budget law proposal was presented, and therefore the government is giving relevance to that date to say that people that did not comply with specific steps until that date are no longer able to apply for the NHR tax regime if they want to have it starting next year. Okay, so the ones that as we speak, so on the 6th of December, that are still relevant are to have already a residence visa or a residence permit application that has been initiated by the end of December. And to be honest, knowing how difficult it is to even start the visa applications, because all the consulates are very packed with appointments. So to be honest, I think this rule is more for people that have already started. I don't think that we have enough room to try and start this process until the end of the year, but we will get to that. I will explain this in more detail. The second one is for people that already have a valid residence visa, and I'm talking about people that applied for the golden visa in the past or other kinds of visas, and they already have the residence title. And if they do have, they have the right to only apply for the NHR tax regime until the end of next year, okay? And the last one, which is still potentially possible to achieve until the end of the year, is for the applicant to sign a promissory employment contract or an employment contract or a secondment agreement until the end of the year, which activity needs obviously to be performed within the Portuguese territory. And the final step would be to register under the NHR, so to apply for the NHR status until the 31st of March of 2024 or 2025 for the ones that are able to have the regime extended for next year. So the question is, what are we doing for people that do not comply with any of these conditions? What we have been doing, and that's why the last month has been very busy for tax lawyers in Portugal, is that what we're trying to do, because we don't comply with any of the conditions that would extend the regime until the end of next year, what we are obviously trying to do is to have people either acquiring or leasing properties in Portugal still this year, and even if they do not have a visa, to still try and register them as Portuguese tax residents until the end of this year. What will this mean? That your NHR status will start this year, okay? So it will start in 2023. So you are basically losing 1 out of the 10 years that the NHR regime will apply. But again, it's better to have 9 years than to have none. So what we have been doing, in fact, and that this is still possible, obviously, the sooner the better. We are getting very close to the year end, and we need to consider all the Christmas and obviously the Christmas holidays that typically also the public entities have in Portugal. But we are, and I have been doing that, I've done that today, we are still in position to accept clients that would be willing to get a Portuguese tax address or a title over a Portuguese tax address and still apply until the end of the year, which would entitle them to get access to the NHR tax regime until the end of till the end of 2032, which is the 10-year period for people that start this year. Christina, allow me to make one additional comment, which is something that I have also been doing for some clients, and I think that we may potentially have people that are in these circumstances. So I've been having clients that were telling me, no, I was expecting, I was waiting because I have kids in getting to the university because I needed to wait 1 or 2 years more to get access to the NHR regime. So it's a pity for me because I won't be able to apply. So what we have been doing for some of those clients is basically to tell them to still apply this year, basically becoming Portuguese tax resident in 2023, applying for the NHR status, okay? And because they were not effectively ready to come now, they, by registering as Portuguese tax resident this year and by applying for the NHR status, they put a foot into the regime. And this means that even if they, beginning of 2024, if they cancel or they step down as Portuguese tax residents because they were not effectively ready to come by now, the good thing is that because they had access to the NHR tax regime while the regime was still in place, this means that this status will be valid until the end of 2032. So let's assume that someone becomes Portuguese tax resident and NHR until the end of the year, leaves Portugal beginning mid 2024, and would come to Portugal, let's say in 2026. So when the person comes back from comes back in 2026, basically he needs to register again as Portuguese tax resident, and by doing so, the NHR status that he got access to in 2023 basically is reactivated and will last until the end of 2032. So you don't gain more years, but you still use the ones that started ticking when you firstly applied. And this is an important point, and I've been doing this for some clients. So I believe that we may have people, visitors, participants that may be in this position. And I think it's important to know that this could potentially be an option that would allow us to come afterwards, but at least to still have access to the NHR tax regime. Next slide, please, Tamara. So the end of the NHR regime, what's next? So the thing is, the regime is, in fact, cancelled by the state budget law with this grandfathering regime that will somehow extend it for next year. But for people that do not comply with the grandfathering conditions, and for people that do not apply this year, so the NHR regime will be over. And it has been, let's call it, replaced by a new regime, which is much more restrictive, because now, contrary to what used to happen, you only have access to the entire set of benefits that I've mentioned in the first slide, which is the exemption on dividends and others, if you are effectively developing an activity in Portugal, and an activity that, so until now, or as we speak, we have a list of high added value activities, which is significantly broad. But from January 2024 onwards, this new regime basically limits the eligibility for this regime to people that are either professors or scientific researchers that operate in the R&D sector, that have job positions or members of the board of certified startups, or, and this is the only hope that we still have, that people that have a job position to be carried out in the Azores or in Madeira. So basically, they need to become tax residents in one of these islands or one of these archipelags, and they need to develop an activity which is still to be defined by the regional governments. And I was mentioning this to Christina, that knowing how the regional governments, at least the one from Madeira, because that's where I'm from, it's very pro-investment, so it has a very pro-investment approach. I would say that the list will be much broader than the one that we will have in the mainland. So it's important to mention, as I was saying, nowadays in the current NHR tax regime, you can become a Portuguese tax resident and be, for example, only a pensionist or only someone that has shares of non-Portuguese companies and will get exempt dividends. But from under this new regime, you can only have access to the other exemptions if you have an activity which falls within one of these job positions and which needs to be developed as an employer, as an employee, or as a self-employee. So this is more clearly much more restrictive. And again, for pensionists, the 10% regime will be over. So it won't even apply any longer. So that's a big difference. And we are talking about 10% versus potentially 48%. So it's a huge difference. So this is what the important thing that I want to mention about the new regime. It may potentially be interesting. My hopes are all in Madeira and the Azores. That's where it can still be competitive because it's a very difficult product to sell. Trying to look for professors and R&D players, it's not that easy. So it's not a product that we can sell as a country. But again, there's still some hope. But again, my main advice would be clearly to either be able to comply with one of the grandfathering conditions that allows us to apply for the NHR until the end of next year, or to be on the safe side, to apply until the end of this year as NHR.
Okay.
Next slide, please, Tamara. So the main takeaways that I would want you guys to have out of this webinar. So the individuals that this was the first concern, the individuals that are already registered as NHR and will be registered until the end of the year are not affected by these changes. So they will keep benefiting from their NHR status for the 10 years, obviously counting from the year where it started. Those that become tax resident until the end of 2023, as well as those that do it until the end of 2024 under this special grandfathering regime, will benefit from the current NHR rules, so the ones that apply now will remain applicable. And those that only become tax resident in 2024 and are not protected by this grandfathering regime may in fact benefit from this new regime, but as I mentioned, the terms and conditions are much more restrictive than the NHR is. Okay. And so this would be this would summarize what I've mentioned. Okay. And my final comment, knowing that, as I was mentioning, it's difficult to apply for a visa that would, until the end of this year, that would allow you to apply for the NHR until the end of the year. I think that when we're talking about, in this case, UK citizens or any non-European Union citizens, even if we are able to apply for the NHR until the end of the year without any visa requirement, I think that obviously, even to give more substance to the Portuguese tax residency, I think that someone that is not an European Union citizen needs to apply in parallel to any of the visas that Portugal has available, being the Golden Visa, which is clearly the most famous one or the most popular one, but other kinds of visa that I would let Mark and Maria after to explain in more detail.
Okay. Thank you very much, Nunu. That was an excellent summary, and I can see that we have well over 120 people listening to that. So I think the caliber and quality of the information you've just given is very important. And I would say, ladies and gentlemen, Nunu's full contact details will be available very shortly. When we do the Q&As, we're having all our speakers' full contact details up. So if your question doesn't get answered, you can email Nunu or Mark or Maria directly and put your question to them. So please don't worry about that. You will get all those details very shortly. And we will now switch to our second speaker, Mr. Mark Penny from Suncap Visa, and Mark will just talk us through the differences. Clearly, for our listeners are clear that there are lots of different visas available in Portugal. The D series, which Mark will tell us about in a moment. And we've just lost our slides. Okay, I'm sure we're coming back to them in a moment. So there are visas in Portugal which give you residency. One set is the D series of visas, which Mark will talk briefly about, which imply that you're going to live in Portugal. That's why you're going to reside there. And the golden visa is one of those types of visa. It is the only visa that allows you not to have to live in Portugal or to be resident in Portugal. But it is one of the visa options. And then the NHR is your tax status, which is, as Nuno was explaining earlier, which is a separate issue. So, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to go back to the slides, I hope. Yes, here we go. Okay. Fantastic. Thank you, Tamara. So, Mark, if I may present you to our listeners, tell us a little bit briefly. I know you only have a couple of slides, or 3 or 4 slides. Do tell us a little bit about what you think our listeners should be doing based on what CMS and Nuno have the advice that Nuno's just given us.
Okay, so thank you very much, first of all, Christina, for inviting me along. Pleasure. And thanks you, Nuno, for explaining that so well. A little bit about Suncat Visa, first of all. We provide a consultancy service to individuals and families, but prior to me establishing Suncat Visa, I was a financial advisor for nearly 35 years, level 4 qualified and an IMC holder. So I spent a lot of time with many families. I manage in excess of 190 million for private individuals. So I understand what most people are looking for when they are considering investing. We have in our strap line, we listen, we guide, we walk alongside. And that pretty much sums up what my job is on a day-to-day basis. Over 40,000 people now are residing in Portugal on an annual basis. So giving sound advice is paramount. Next slide. As Nuno said, the ending of the NHR tax benefits at the end of 23 and 24 are throwing up considerable problems for most investors. Deciding on how to go forward requires a little bit of planning, and we don't have much time on that side, I'm afraid. Nuno quite rightly pointed out, NHR is separate to the visa proposal. However, the valuable tax breaks that we're seeing from the NHR for most UK residents is invaluable. What we can see, and I'll just touch on it briefly, by combining the NHR with one of the golden visa routes, and in the coming weeks we'll hear more about cultural golden visas as well as the full fund golden visas, will throw up opportunities. But for now, the most important thing is getting your NHR. Next slide, please. So I say this to many clients, make sure your ambitions are aligned. Don't let the tax tail wag the dog. We all know Brexit threw up all of these problems, and the most important and valuable thing that most people want is that EU passport and the residency rights. We also know something else. The tax tail is wagging the dog at the moment for many UK people. Last year alone, 6.1 billion was collected by the Exchequer in terms of inheritance tax. That's a 14% increase on the previous year. And it's likely to increase further as fiscal drag, i.e. the freezing of allowances, continues. Those are the bad bits, but we also know some other things. We know that Portugal doesn't have a wealth tax. And we also know that the UK does not apply exit penalties on departure of capital. The other things we know about, and I'm sure Maria will touch on this in her presentation as well, the better quality of living, the higher standard of living, the lower cost of living, and the better facilities that are available out there. Next slide, please. So, spoiler alerts, I'm afraid. The slide shows essentially 2 graphs. The one on the left shows the number of British people deported since 2020 from an EU residency. Over 1,500 Brits were thrown out of different parts of Europe. Fines range from €100 to 10,000 euros. So planning your life on a tourist visa, in my experience, will not work. The right-hand graph, shows the number of residents that are now electing Portugal as their home. And you can see that that number is increasing. Next slide, please. So how does SUNCAP go about meeting your needs? Well, as I said, over 35 years of experience, I sit down and I look at what your objectives are, your time frame, your objectives, whether it's a D visa or a golden visa requirement, whether you can afford the length of stay, whether it's 7 days, or you can go the 183 days. In my experience, what causes the most problems is people elect to go down the 183-day route, only to discover that an elderly parent falls ill and the plans have to change and they return to the UK, or pets or children, would you believe? So it's essential that we have an honest and frank discussion. My objective is always to work with the client and provide an holistic plan. And this could be achieved through time. Next slide. As I said at the beginning, Portugal has a range of visa solutions. We are now starting to see the arts and cultural heritage visas coming on stream, and we should know more about those in January and February. These are half the price of a conventional golden visa at 250,000 euros. However, they are restricted into the arts and cultural sector, whereas the venture capital funds obviously give diversification across other sectors. We're seeing solar energy, tourist wine funds, technology, and Maria's going to talk about her hospitality fund as well. So from my point of view, it's a question of understanding what your requirements are and then finding the right visa solution, whether it be a D visa or whether it be a golden visa. And I'm happy to work with you. Next slide. Happy to take any questions at the end of this presentation, and thank you for listening to me.
Thank you very much, Mark. Thank you. Right. And that is a lovely picture of Mark's recent party, no doubt. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for that, Mark. Now, as you touched on, Mark, there are visa solutions in Portugal, the D series of visas, which are for those who wish to get residency in Portugal. But you can also get residency via one of the visa options, which is called the golden visa, which only requires you to be in Portugal for 7 days a year. Now, for the reasons that Mark explained and why Nuno was explaining, that is appealing because it means you get residency in Portugal, but enormous flexibility, i.e. only 7 days a year you have to actually spend there. Now, the reason we are now going to talk a little bit more about the golden visa is purely because, as Nuno said, you can use the combination of a golden visa, only 7 days a year in Portugal, and add on top of it the NHR tax status, which is purely a declaration of your tax status and the benefits that therefore come with it. So we have now invited, and we won't be too long on this part because I know Maria is also very keen to take your questions. We've asked our friend Maria Alvarez from VidaCap, or Vida Fund, I should say, to talk to us briefly about the hospitality options, the hospitality funds that can be used under the golden visa. And I think, are we ready, Tamara, to start from the beginning?
Yeah.
We're ready. Okay. So you're starting with this slide then, Maria, are you?
Yeah, many thanks, Christina. I just wanted to highlight a little bit my background. I'm a corporate and tax lawyer. I started my career at Freshfields in Madrid, and then I moved to London. I was a resident in London for 10 years as part of the structured capital markets team of Barclays Capital. I think that's relevant because being Spanish, I've gone through the non-dom in the UK. I basically moved to Portugal to apply for the NHR. So I also have a lot of experience from a tax perspective in comparing the UK to Spain and Portugal. I'm happy to address your concerns around that. And I think one of the key aspects of this webinar, and I'm jointly working with Nuno and with Mark with a bunch of clients right now, is to basically address those individuals that want to be entitled to apply the NHR either this year or have the entitlement to apply it in the next 10 years. Nuno can help you sort that the NHR through various mechanisms before year end, and then you still have a few months to see whether you actually want to move to Portugal or you don't want to move to Portugal, but you want to be entitled to the residency and the citizenship through the Golden Visa. In the case of the Golden Visa, as you might be aware, is a residency by investment program. By investing €500,000 in certain regulated funds and in other mechanisms that Mark can basically walk you through, you're entitled from the first year to live and study in Portugal, and also to live and study abroad in the European Union. And it doesn't require you to reallocate to Portugal, different from many other systems, for example, the Spanish or the Portuguese or the Maltese. You only have to spend 14 days every 2 years in a term of 5 years be entitled to apply for the citizenship. The biggest difference between residency and citizenship is that you can actually live, work, and study in any place of the European Union. Whilst you're a resident only, you can do that in Portugal. Another big difference between the Portuguese regime and other regimes across Europe is you don't actually have to become a tax resident. You're elected to become a tax resident if you wish to. And in this case, you might and then apply for the NHR, but it doesn't have any direct tax implications. As you're fully aware or might be aware, Portuguese has an amazing tax regime, for example, compared to the Spanish one. You don't have inheritance tax, gift tax, wealth tax. In Spain now, there's a very scary tax that's the high wealth tax for high net worth individuals above 3 million euros. So that's something that you also have to compare when looking into different tax systems. I think one of the key figures about Portugal as well is with one investment of €500,000 in a regulated fund, all of the family can benefit. So you can apply for the Golden Visa for residency and citizenship for your spouse, for your children below 25 years that are dependent, and for the parents above 65. So it's a program that is quite efficient for a family planification route. Here in this slides, you can have the details of, but we'll make them available. In specific, I think one thing that's very relevant for you to know is the Golden Visa program continues. There has been a lot of discussion this year of whether they were finishing or not finishing. It does not continue for real estate direct investment. So the investment in residential, commercial, or touristic properties in Portugal does not qualify for the Golden Visa since the 7th of October. Right now, there's a few options available, and one of them is Vida Fund. We're a hospitality growth fund. We're basically targeting an IRR above 10% per annum. And we basically invest in the niche market between a hotel and an Airbnb. We saw this niche market for condominiums, branded residencies, where we can basically buy off-market properties from banks, from family-owned businesses that do not have continuation. We basically, by operating existing assets, hotels, apart hotels, condominiums, branded residencies, we refurbish them, we reconcept them, and we operate them. We have a very good hospitality team. Half of the team here at Vida comes from the hospitality sector. We have the whole team that came from the Selena management, also Blue Shift, which basically has a mandate from Hyatt to operate all of the hotels. So it's always the same, buying off market and refurbishing and operating to then sell. Here's a very interesting graph, is the evolution of the pricing of branded residencies in the last 6 years in Lisbon, Porto, and Algarve. So you can clearly see that it's an upward trending market. And we are one of the few participants that basically is exploring this niche in a fund that qualifies for the Golden Visa. I just wanted to leave you with a keynote. This is one of the projects we're investing in. It's basically, we bought a 37-unit condominium in the Algarve. We bought it from a private auction of Caixa General de Depósitos. To give you a sense, we bought it at 2,500 euros per square meter. The refurbished bin was approximately 1,000, and now we're operating with the aim to sell it in year 7 at around 8,000 euros a square meter. So you can see it's an incredible project. It was already operating and running as a hotel. Something that's very relevant from our fund is we don't take any licensing, construction, or leverage risk. So we're very keen and we are very conscious that this project is basically addressed to Golden Visa, which want to have their principal protected and at the same time want to maximize their return. Here you will have access to the deck after. It's very relevant also. We're a regulated fund. Vida and the founding partners were basically in the advisory of the fund. The fund is managed by Stack Management, who's an independent third party, and they also manage other funds. Some of them qualify for Golden Visa, others do not. That means that we are extremely under an extreme control of a third party that's regulated and also by the CMVM. So we basically decide of what deals we think are interesting in the pipeline that is interesting for the fund, and we will present the transactions to the investment committee of STAT, which basically carry on their own due diligence. They do a legal, technical, and finance due diligence to consider whether a project qualifies or not under the fund's regulation. Here you'll have quite a lot of detail as well on the hospitality management team. I think you really have to be careful if you are investing in a Golden Visa fund as of the 7th of October, not to invest in teams that only come from real estate or have been real estate development teams, but teams that have solid expertise on hospitality or on health or education, but basically it has to be an operating business. In our case, we have integrated the founding partners of Blue Shift, which have an extensive experience in career, more than 20 years in the hospitality area of Portugal. They've worked for Conrad, Sublime, and Hyatt as well. So I think that's a clear message to understand. File the NHR before year end. Maybe in the interim, look at whether you want to file for a D7 or a Golden Visa. And if you do go for Golden Visa, please try to find funds that are not real estate based, but rather that actually run a business. In our case, the returns 7 to 12% IRR per year, and we're expecting 7 to 8% coming from the operational side. So it's a very solid business. We already have 3 assets right now, and we're looking on the pipeline much more.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much, Maria. We're now going to finish up with our contact slide, and we're going to spend the next 10 minutes or so, ladies and gentlemen, taking some of your questions. We've had some excellent questions, I'm delighted to say, and we're now going to open up the floor to questions. We've had some excellent questions in advance of today's seminar as well. Here we have everybody's full contact details, Nunu, Mark and Maria, with their direct email addresses and their direct contact mobile numbers as well. They'd all be delighted to hear from you after the webinar if you'd like to email them or call them. But in the meantime, I'm just going to ask some of the most pressing questions that we've been asked by our audience. Nuno, I'm going to start with you, if I may. Well, this is an interesting question. We were discussing it earlier, actually, in the run-through. So our visitor, PIT, has asked us, I understand that there have been further changes to the NHR, yes, and you will now have until 31st of December 2024 to apply as long as you are already tax resident. What is the definition of tax resident? Pitt says, we already have our Portuguese fiscal number, but we are still awaiting approval on our Golden Visa application, which was submitted in December 21. And this is a common feedback we're getting from people, that there have been problems a length of time about the time it takes to process the Golden Visa applications. What is the definition of tax resident, Nuno, in this case?
Being very practical, Christina, the definition of tax residence is when you have a NIF which has a Portuguese tax address in it.
Right.
So
the NIF stands for Número de Identificação Fiscal. So it's basically a Portuguese tax number.
Tax ID number. The thing is, for example, people that applied for the Golden Visa, one of the conditions to apply for the Golden Visa is that the investment needs to be made through a Portuguese bank account. And Portuguese bank accounts can only be opened if you already have a Portuguese tax ID number. Most of the clients that do this, so answering one of the questions that I've seen in the Q&A, having an IF or having a tax ID number is not by itself sufficient to call yourself a Portuguese tax resident. So in order to be a Portuguese tax resident, as I was saying, you need to have a title over a Portuguese address, and you need to go to the tax office or ask your lawyer to apply for it, and to turn that address into your effective fiscal or tax address, which is basically when you have a tax ID number, but linked to a Portuguese address, okay?
Right.
And so I'm not seeing here where is Pete's question.
Oh, it might be up the top. Yes,
Oh.
there it's the second from the top in the chat box. That sadly only us speakers can see this, ladies and gentlemen. But
Yeah, okay.
it is a list of questions. Yeah.
So let me just yeah.
So it's at the top of the chat.
Yeah, I've seen it.
Yeah.
So the definition. So again, the definition of tax resident, being more technical, is complying with one out of two conditions, spending more than 183 days in Portugal, which is roughly 6 months. And the other one is to have a title over a Portuguese address that you have considered to be your base. And considering it your base is, as I was saying, going to the tax office and saying, this is my address, please register me as a Portuguese tax resident. So just having a NIF is not enough. That NIF needs to be linked to a Portuguese address. And the year where that happens or happened, you have until the 31st of March of the following year to apply for the NHR status. So the people that is considering people that will apply, have applied this year for the Portuguese tax residency, so they got a NIF with link to a Portuguese address, they have until the 31st of March 2024 to get the NHR status. But the urgent thing to do if we want to apply this year is to get the Portuguese tax residency, because the status can be obtained until the end of March next year.
Okay, fine. All right. On the same topic, Nunu, before we answer a question about golden visas, Nunu, there's a question in the chat box which I'll read out to you from Varun, which is the one he's near the top as well. He's under Ivan. Varun says, I am not a resident, nor do I hold a NIF, Portuguese tax number, in Portugal, but my wife and son are registered and lived in Portugal since 2022. Varun says that online he has seen that having dependents enrolled at an educational establishment in Portuguese territory on the 10th of October 2023 means that he, Varun, should be entitled to the NHR regime if he changes his residency to Portugal in 2024. That is correct.
That is correct. Again, to be very honest, we are very concerned or / afraid, because just to give you a practical aspect which is important. Nowadays, applying for the NHR status is an automatic. So basically what the system of the Portuguese tax authorities does is they check anyone that became a Portuguese tax resident. People that apply for the NHR status, the system basically checks whether that person was registered as Portuguese tax resident in any of the 5 previous years. If that was not the case, the NHR status will be approved. Now with this transitional regime, we are a bit worried because we don't know exactly how will this be analyzed. So for sure, when I get to 2024 and I apply for the current NHR regime, I will need to show that I've complied with one of these conditions in 2023. And I will need, I assume, so what I mean is there will be an additional analysis to be made by the Portuguese tax authorities. But answering this question, one of the conditions is to have children enrolled in Portuguese schools until the 10th of October. These are one of the conditions that needs to be achieved until the end of the 10th of October of 2023. So answering this specific question, and based on what we know from the the regime that got out of the final version of the state budget law, this is one of the conditions that will allow this person to apply for the NHR only in 2024.
Okay. Okay, Nunu. I've got another one for you, Nunu. This is from Kaylia Nell, who is also here in the chat box, actually, but and then I'm going to switch around a bit to visa questions. But Kaylia Nell says, I do not yet hold Portuguese residency, but I intend to apply for the D7, i.e. the residency visa, a permanent residency visa, and the NHR tax status. Is a VFS appointment date to lodge my D7 sufficient proof of intent to relocate to Portugal? If yes, does this date need to be before the 31st of December 2023, or would an appointment scheduled for next year still prove sufficient intent?
These are the gray areas where I would not love to be in this position if I would be Kayla's lawyer.
Yeah.
Because the thing is, these are the scenarios, to be honest. I think that the clear scenarios is obviously people that have already the residence title and people that can show that they have an appointment with the SEF or IMAP. For example, the people that apply for the D7 visa or other the D visas, is that the first step is taken in the country of origin and with the consulate. And I cannot guarantee, based on the wording of the final version of the state budget law, that an interview or an appointment to happen next year still at the consulate level would be enough to argue that we started the process in 2023 and therefore we can apply for the NHR in 2024. These are the cases. Maybe I'm being too prudent, but I wouldn't love to be in a position next year to have to discuss with the tax authorities that this is enough or this is not enough. So these are the cases that, based on my advice, I would say that if possible, to try and apply until the end of the year, so we don't even have this issue. Obviously, the regime will end in 2032 and not 2033, which would happen if we are able to apply next year. But I would, in my personal opinion, prefer to be on the safe side and apply this year than to be in a position where the application may be deemed as not enough by the Portuguese tax authorities, and we would be in a position where we have absolutely no access to the NHR.
Okay, right. One last question, Nunu. If a person or a couple, this is from Anonymous, if a person or a couple have a signed completion deed for a purchased Portuguese property dated before the 10th of October 2023, can the owners apply for a D7 visa and NHR tax residency during 2024 to retain the NHR tax benefits of this year?
Again, this is one of the scenarios that the state budget law foresees, and therefore the answer is yes.
Yes.
Again, being prudent. I don't know. I'm just thinking because I have obviously lots of experience dealing with the Portuguese tax authorities, and they tend to be very picky. So I'm just when reading this document, I wonder if when you buy, just for you to know, when you buy a property in Portugal, you need to declare in the public deed what is the intended use of this property. And you may say it's for your primary residence, for your secondary residence, or for any other to resell, to resell. So I'm just considering discussing with someone from the tax authorities that says that when I bought it, I didn't buy with the intention to use it as my primary residence. But again, this is probably excess of prudence. So answering the question is yes, you could apply next year because you've complied with one of the grandfathering conditions.
Okay.
I'm just worried that knowing how the Portuguese tax authorities operate, and because they need, in this specific case, they will have the right to analyze my request in more detail because they will see what proof do I have to allow me to only apply in 2024. That's where I'm concerned because Portuguese tax authorities, I was saying, are not very easy sometimes. So again, these gray areas are being, if possible, leading to applications being made this year and not next year.
And Nunu, this question I'm going to give you shortly, you'll also say is a grey area. Nunu, this is anonymous attendee at 4:52 today. Nunu, how about the condition of having dependent children enrolled in a school confirmed before 10th of October 2023? Can the children be enrolled from September 2024 onwards, as long as it has been confirmed before October the 10th, 2023? You're going to say Gray area.
Again, very gray, but again, the rule apparently allows this to happen. But I think that the rationale behind is for people that already had to start very soon. But I would say that this, again, is something that if I would be in a position, so if we were not having this discussion and the client would come to me with this question next year, I would say I would obviously fight for it.
Yeah. Okay. Anonymous attendee 459. I own a house in Portugal, so already have a NIF, Portuguese financial number, and a bank account. In order to become a tax resident, is it sufficient to just register my Portuguese address as my tax address at the Finanças? I am a UK citizen with no visa for the EU, but I am trying to get my D7 interview ASAP.
So what I would do in this case again is I would apply, so because obviously the title over the Portuguese address already exists, the NIF already exists, but what we need to do is to change the address from the UK into this Portuguese house that the anonymous owns, and to register as Portuguese tax resident based on this. The fact that there is no there is no visa yet, based on the general understanding of the Portuguese tax authorities, is that non-EU citizens can only apply to Portuguese tax residency if they already have a visa. But our practical experience with some tax offices is that they are not requesting this. So this specific person, if she wants, she can contact me, and I'm more than happy to assist, because we have been managing to do this, but I wouldn't wait for next year. Okay. I would do it this year.
You do it this year. Okay, right. Maria, I have a question for you. One of our anonymous, what is your current time estimate to receive the final visa? Oh, this is a killer question. The final visa from the date of the fund investment.
Okay, so reality is, as you all know, from COVID, there has been a lot of delays in CEF, up to 24 months. There's people that got it in 12, others in 16. The reality is CEF has now been transferred, the competences of CEF have now been transferred to AIMA. And we still don't know if that's going to accelerate the process. I think it would be safe to say probably 12 months to 14 right now. There are ways to accelerate that after 3 months for those cases that have some type of special urgency. There has been specific cases, and we can walk you through on how that timing can be accelerated. But I would say on the safe side, and until AIMA comes through with normal processes, it's probably around 12 months at least.
Okay.
There's some specific cases that can be accelerated, and we can walk them through. But I think right now, most of the clients, investors that we're having, basically file the NHR, and although maybe Nuno cannot explain more around it, but there is some ways to file the NHR before year end, and then you can work with Mark on whether you want to go for a D7 if you plan to actually move here, or to a golden visa if you're not planning to move here but want to have the option to basically move in the next 10 years. So I think that's the two. That would be my process.
Okay.
Yeah,
on how to move forward this.
Yeah, Mark stands ready to help any of our visitors and listeners interested in that. Maria, I have one more question for you from our friend Paul Stannard. What I'd like to know is, how do the golden visa investment opportunities, how are the golden visa opportunities or investment opportunities different now compared to when it was mainly around investing in real estate? So it's been a really big change in that, hasn't there?
Yeah, there has been a lot of changes since 2021 on amounts, on type of investments. The good thing is that the rules have been grandfathered for everyone that invested within certain rules. So that's a really good, I think it basically gets the standards of Portugal on the legality of the system. Currently, as of the 7th of October, direct investment in real estate, regardless of whether it's residential, commercial, or touristic, by an investor does not qualify for the golden visa. So investors cannot invest in real estate. That's the easiest conclusion about this. They can invest in many other things, amongst others, regulated funds. And within the regulated funds, there are various types of funds. Depends on your risk return profile. There's crypto funds, there's energy funds, there's agricultural funds, there's hospitality, there's education. It will depend on what type of assets you want to invest and what returns are you expecting. You have from crypto and venture capitals, generally, they're expecting very high returns with a lot of volatility. Then you have the agriculture and the energy funds, which are very low profile, risk profile, but also quite low returns, between 3 to 5. And then in the middle, I think you have multiple funds that are on the company's operational side. It could be, and they're also somehow real estate asset backed. For example, in the case of Vida, we invest in hotels, apart hotels, condominiums that are existing already and they're operating. We're expecting an IRR to be around 10 to 12%. But of course, you have the appreciation of all the portfolio during the life of the fund of the 7 years. So if we're not able to manage to get to those return on the operational side, you have the real estate appreciation. But you have to, Mark can basically walk you through the different types of funds, and depends on your risk profile appetite, Vida will qualify for your preferred asset or others.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the other thing I would just add to that, Maria, Christine, if I may, is that investors tend to consider spreading the risk and not putting all of the investments into the one provider. And I think that's what I would be recommending people consider. Also, we mustn't rule out what's coming in January, which is this cultural golden visa, and that will also throw up opportunities. And also the other aspect to that is it won't come under the control of IAMA. It will actually be issued the visa rights from JEPA. So there will be a faster turnaround time in that, and a project can only get underway when it's approved by them. So no money can be taken. And I think that's going to be quite an interesting twist as we go forward. It'll
be another option, a golden visa option. Yes, we should add that, ladies and gentlemen, 500,000 euros is the minimum, is the investment you need at the moment into Portugal to qualify for a golden visa in the current crop of funds. They're not real estate funds, but they are funds like Maria's. We should add that all the funds have different minimum investment requirements. Maria, yours is probably 100,000 euros, is it?
Our fund is 200,000 euros.
200,000, okay.
So basically, investors can diversify into different
into two different funds to get up to the 500,000 euros. But as Mark so rightly says, changes are coming next year via introduction of the cultural golden visa funds, which will allow investment only, well, you'll only need 250,000 euros. Right, I've got one final question for Nuno before we finish. I have to say, I think it's been a fascinating seminar, but we are 10 minutes over. Last question for Nuno from Martin Preto. Can someone suspend their NHR regime for 10 years and then resume it and get the same exact advantages? Or is there any limit for the suspension?
No, there is no. The thing is that the regime itself is valid for 10 years. So if you suspend for 10 years, you won't get access to it. You lost it. But there is no. So I can apply this year, be away 9 years, and still benefit for a couple of months or
for the last year.
So, but not more than 10 years, because when you suspend, the clock doesn't start ticking again when you come back. It never stopped ticking.
Never stopped ticking since the beginning. Exactly. Right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much to our 120 visitors. I really appreciate your time and energy and effort on this busy Wednesday afternoon. We will now come and see us at Moving to Portugal on the 14th of March in central London. We'd love to see you. You will hopefully see Maria, Nuno and Mark on the 14th of March. By then you will no doubt have got your visas and your NHR and everything else, but there'll be some new things you will need to know about by then. So I'd like to thank sincerely my friends and colleagues Nuno from CMS, Maria from Vida, and Mark Penny from Suncap. Thank you to all three of our speakers and to my wonderful colleague Tamara, who made this whole webinar possible. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming to our webinar. Come and see us at Moving to Portugal, and we'll be in touch very shortly after this webinar with all the presentations and the full contact details of our speakers. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Christina.
Christina, bye-bye.